I want to talk about what on the surface really is a kind of a somber topic, but ultimately I think it really is a very positive one. Because when we look at workplace violence, it's an extraordinary kind of a concept. That somebody doesn't go home at the end of shift because of somebody else's intentional behavior. And we watch TV and read the papers, but it seems like it's getting worse. You know, we try to look at, are the trends getting worse? Are they better? It feels bad out there. And what I want to do is have you walk out here feeling better, because there are things we can do. I've been doing this work for over 20 years. Really, back in the early 80s, I started out doing what we call trauma work. I was working mostly with electrical utilities, assisting them when somebody was killed on the job. And I developed death notification protocols. We'd go into people's homes, we'd notify them, you know, women, their husbands are dead, and they'd have to talk to how do we work with children. And then we have to go back and look at how do we restore the company to full functioning, because those are terrible events. And we were very, very busy throughout the 80s. But in 1993, my career really took a fundamental shift when one of the utilities I worked for had a fellow murdered on the job, actually just right down the 605 here, at one of the steam plants. And we did the notifications, we did the family assistance, went into homes at a very trying time, like some of y'all do. And we did that, but at the same time, then we were looking at this thing called workplace violence for the first time. And we're trying to get our arms around it and try to understand it. Only a couple of months after that first homicide, I was asked to go down to Dana Point Post Office. Some of you may remember, in May of '93, there's a shooting there, and I headed up the team that went in. And then we became full-time focused on workplace violence. And as all you would probably understand real easily, it's better to prevent those kind of things than to come in afterwards and clean up. And that really has been the focus. And the nicest part about, I think, my presentation is I want you to know a couple of simple truths. Number one, violence is preventable. I will tell you unequivocally that every one of those gross acts you see on TV, every one of those events that stun us and shock us as a society, were preventable. The difficulty is the people who knew stuff didn't know what they knew, didn't know who to go to with it, and some of those things. And part of our goal today is to make sure, at least here, that we know who to go to. We address that. As I mentioned, I got my start back in the day. Dana Point, there was a shooting, and what was interesting is we had this headline, "Suspected Killer Gave No Hint." And after we spent months there, actually, and interviewed every employee, we found out that people were afraid of him. People expected him to come in. We knew that other employees were arming themselves because of their belief that they were dangerous or at risk. There was no surprise. They knew he was dangerous. I've been working with the City of LA. That was the other slide. They've unfortunately had a number of employees killed, and I'm on the citywide threat assessment team, and any threat to an employee or elected official, I get the call on and work with the PD, city attorneys, and others. And then more recently, in November of last year, less than a year ago, I worked with the human resources folks at LAX after the shooting there. And once again, we had a horrible event, but if you go back and look at the facts as it surrounds it, this young fella had been acting in such an egregious manner for so long, he moved to LA. His parents, who lived in New Jersey, contacted local police chief, who contacted LAPD, who sent a unit out to his house while he was en route to LAX. Had mom and dad called one day earlier, there wouldn't have been a shooting there. And the truth is, there's information out there. And what I want to do is spend the next hour talking about what is it regular folks like you and I can do and see, and where do we go with what we see. And this is a big deal, because we have another simple truth. I'm in the business of doing something that can't be done. I actually met with a client the other day, and I said, I'm trying to charge you money for something that's impossible. You're going to pay me to predict the future. And as you all know, that's kind of a fool's rush, but the truth is we do. I was being interviewed on CBS radio after Congresswoman Giffords was shot. And being interviewed as well was Congresswoman Richardson and an FBI agent. And the FBI agent said what we often hear. We hear it as recently, only a couple months ago, where people will stand in front of the TV and they'll say, you can't tell. We don't know how to predict these things. They just happen. And if anyone says they can predict, well, then they're wrong. And I had to stop the FBI agent and said, you're wrong. We can predict, we do. Anybody got kids over 30? You've got then 3 decades and change of observing your daughter engage in patterns of behavior. And you will project out the likely consequence of her continuing patterns. So I bet many times in 30 years you said, baby, you need to cut that out. And she'll say, but Mom, I'm not going to. You say, I know you're not going to, because you're going to cut that out. We as parents predict behavior all the time. Now, if we try to guess what she's going to do next Thursday at 7 p.m., all bets are off. But you cannot get to an act without having gone down a path. So we're going to talk about observing patterns of behavior. We're going to talk about projecting out likely consequences. We're going to talk about what is the likely consequence for this person who may act in the same way as somebody else but have very different meaning and direction. And ultimately, how can we as a company take steps to address behavior and make sure you go home and to shift? And the good news is we can do this. We can do this. To really set the context, we can look at some kind of historical underpinnings, if you will. This is the framework with all workplace violence programs. We have policies. We try to create procedures that work, and we're doing that here, and this is part of a larger initiative. We have this weird thing, though, and I think there's actually maybe in the long run more harmful than good. We have this bizarre concept out there called zero tolerance. And I say it's bizarre because it's actually evolved into zero judgment. And the easiest case you all know is that little girl on the internet. Is a case that went viral where there's a little 12-year-old fifth grader sitting in the school cafeteria cutting up her lunch. They brought the sheriffs in, they arrested her. And why'd they hook up that little girl? I gave you a clue. She had a knife. She's cutting up her lunch. We can't have kids bringing knives to school. Zero tolerance. Now, I don't know if you all are aware, but it was a little plastic Dixie knife. Yeah. Let's pretend for a moment there's a good one, a Henkel's or something nice. There's still a difference between a little girl cutting up her lunch and some kid stabbing students like we saw in Pennsylvania only a few months ago. They're different. And when we treat them as if they're the same, that's not zero tolerance. What is that? We know that it's just wrong. So one of our challenges, if we can predict, if we can see behavior, if we can take action, what we do has to be determined by the facts of this case. And one size fits all doesn't work. And I'm not a big fan of we do the same thing for everybody. When we start thinking that that's what zero tolerance means, we're fools. We're wrong. Zero tolerance here means we won't accept bad behavior. Now, I'm not sure what we're going to do until we figure out what we have. Then we'll create a plan that meets it. That makes sense to me. There is a CIF and a city section rule that says no football player can be on the field for 60 minutes after last lightning strike. So last season, we're on the field, we're watching the game, there's a lightning strike off in the distance. So the players had to leave the field. What happened for the next hour? What do you think? The band took the field and played. There's no rule about the band. I don't want a rule to apply to everything. Let's use judgment. Let's figure out what's best for this situation. I didn't have a problem with my kids on the field. The lightning was 1,000 miles away. Okay, maybe only 8 or 10, but it's a ways off. How do we use judgment? If we do, we've got a long way, and we will do very well. So we're going to do that. We are developing an internal threat assessment team, people to come in and look at it, more sets of eyes. Too many is too much, but a couple of sets of eyes with different perspectives means we get a better look at what we have. We need to know what to do. You had training last year on how to respond and stuff, and I'm hoping that's an irrelevant training. I hope that's stuff you never have to use. And then we used to only do supervisory training. I used to go all over the country doing training for managers, and we realized that was crazy, because typically rank and file, frontline supervisors know more than managers, who know more than consultants, and everybody not only has a piece of this, but everyone can meaningfully participate. And we're trying to make sure we do the right thing here. But many companies have had this. We've still had shootings, so I want to address a couple of the challenges, and the way I like doing it is looking at lessons learned. We can go back and look at events, and as we understand, we can apply some of the lessons learned to where we are now. And one of the watermark events, the watershed events in this field was this fella. So who's this guy? Virginia Tech, Sung Hui Cho. That's a picture most of you know. And anybody who have kids in college? How many of you have kids? Do you know what the Clery Act is? Every institution of higher education in the United States must have instant messaging capacity or capability so that if there's an event on campus, they can get a hold of all faculty, staff, and students. Clery Act is one of the results of the Virginia Tech shooting. Now, I have a son who just graduated from Cal State Northridge, and every time he gets one of those, he gets a hold of me. And last year, I remember one. He calls me, actually, and he said, Dad, I just got a text that says that there's a suspected gunman at the library. So my son and 500 other students did what? Went to the library, yeah. I would have gone, but I was out of town. I want to see what they... We have this belief somehow that the lesson learned from Virginia Tech is we got to IM everybody. No. The lesson learned from Virginia Tech is that Sung Hui Cho had been scaring people for years. He had people in the dorms afraid to talk to him. I had a roommate that wouldn't talk to me for a while, but we were married. But I've never had somebody afraid to talk to me. He had people afraid to make eye contact. He had faculty afraid to teach him. He had a long history of issues. The lesson is, people tell you, and they'll warn you over and over again. Pay attention and do something about the behavior. That's the real lesson. No, this guy is Stephen Kamirziak, and the reason you don't know him is he only shot, 21? And he only killed 7. And I'm a little sarcastic there, but it didn't make as much press because it was diminished from Virginia Tech, which happened only 10 months earlier. But once again, while not nearly as extraordinary as Cho, he gave off a lot of warnings. He had students, again, afraid of him. His girlfriend was not sure. Remember, he's a fellow that sent a bullet to his girlfriend for Valentine's Day. I guess it's sweet. I'm still not sure. He had this fascinating tattoo. So who's that character? Jigsaw. So there's a whole series of movies where the main character, Jigsaw, is related to them kidnapping and people torture, maim, and kill each other. And here he is, he's got a tattoo of Jigsaw, riding a tricycle through his slashed wrist, bleeding, and in my business we call that a clue. He's telling us something. Now, I was doing training for another organization, actually down at the waterfront. There's a fellow sitting not very far, and I'd show this slide, and I talked about it, and he's tatted up. He's got tattoos on his head, on his ears. I mean, he's inked up. And he goes, wait a minute. Are you saying people with tattoos are dangerous? I said, no, I'd never say that. But I will say, if you have a tattoo that looks like that one, frankly, got tattoos that look like yours, I'm going to pay attention to you. And if you conduct yourself appropriately, you treat people professionally, you do your job competently, I'll leave you alone. But I pay attention to behavior. I pay attention to indicators. I notice what's going on around me. And so do you. And two people can say the same thing and have very different meaning. I don't know what it means, but I don't want to miss the stuff because people tell us things over and over again. And we notice, and we pay attention. I want to show a couple others because here's a fella, Sharif Allman, fairly nice guy until one day he went to work and he shot 9 people. And he worked overnight, so the shooting occurred about 3 a.m. on a Thursday morning. But the real lesson from this event was not the day of the shooting. It was a Sunday before the shooting when he's in his kitchen with a friend. He pulls out his assault rifle and he tells his friend he's going to take that gun to work and kill everybody. And later, when the friend is interviewed by police and asked, why didn't you tell somebody? He said, well, I didn't tell a report because I thought he was only joking, kidding. Wow, what a joke. But we hear that kind of stuff, don't we? I was talking about training a room about this size full of managers for the state of California. And I was talking about a shooting I worked in Fresno a few years ago. And it was unusual because in that particular event, a manager shot and killed a subordinate. I gotta tell you, it generally goes the other way. I'm just saying. And it's a little unusual. Now, I guess kind of an aside, why do you think a manager might kill a subordinate? I mean, there's other ways to mess with somebody. What do you think? Didn't get a raise, blah, blah, no. Didn't make quota, no. Treated him mean, no. Didn't get his raise. You're all gonna know the answer. Love triangle. And when there's a love triangle, forget job titles. And we're not going to talk very much about it today, but we know that domestic violence is a huge workplace issue and a growing workplace concern, a legitimate concern. And we owe people the ability to come to work and go home safely. And domestic violence is a huge intruder into all of our domains. So back to the supervisor. So I was talking about the shooting in Fresno, and I can't hear all that well, but I hear him say something like, Well, about time a manager did something right. We should do that here, you know? And all the other managers sitting around him started laughing because he was only joking. I don't want you as a coworker, as a friend, as a manager to decide who's kidding or not. I want here that if somebody is saying something about killing themselves or killing somebody else or doing something like this, please tell somebody. And the good news is most of them don't mean it, but the bad news is the ones who do it said it too. And bring the right folks to the table to figure out, what does this mean? What's really going on here? And some folks need help. And some folks need to go to jail. And some folks are in between. But I don't know what we have if we don't hear about it. And then one last one real quickly. Who's this fella here? Y'all recognize him? He just pled guilty a few months ago. His name is Scott DeCry. Scott worked at the beauty salon in Seal Beach. Now, once again, a week before the shooting, he's inside the salon, he's yelling at his ex-wife, he's arguing with her, and in front of everybody he says, if you keep fighting me on this custody battle, I will come in here and kill you. And he turned to the owner, I'll kill you. And he turns to all the coworkers. And what did he do a week later? He did what he said he was going to do. And I interviewed some folks that survived the event. And what was interesting is that even before that, and certainly in the days afterwards, they would sit around as a group and say, what are we going to do? And they say, well, we should call the police. Oh, they can't do anything. Let's get armed security. Oh, that won't work. And they come up with ideas and they poo-poo them. Now, I don't know exactly what they should have done, but I know nothing didn't serve them very well. And what we were saying here is, nothing's not an acceptable alternative. Let us know. Share it. We will take a look and try to figure out where to go. And then right up the road, I don't know, there's the shooting at Edison. And again, lots of information, many years of warning. So we have to take the kind of where we were and go to the next level. And the next level really means a couple of things. It means that we as a company, that all of us need to understand a couple, again, simple truths. Nobody just erupts. It's never happened. It's never going to. Even folks that you don't know all that well, because a lot of the folks, when we talk about coworkers, we know them a long time. There's been some really interesting research out there and surveys of employees. Here at Rose Hills, statistically, who would be the most likely source of harm? If one of you were to be injured, who's probably the one who hurt you, statistically? A family. One of the folks coming in, an outsider. Who are we most afraid of? Generally, in broad terms, I don't know about here, but in broad terms, coworkers. Why? Because I've been working with this guy for 3 years. I've been watching that stuff he's been doing, and you know, he's getting a little weird on us. And we see this stuff that makes us a little tense, as opposed to some of the families. How much contact do you have with them? Minutes, sometimes over and over again. And some folks we have a lot of contact with, it's easier. Some folks, like the families coming, you still see a lot. I don't know all of y'all what you do, but I do know the business. And I know sometimes at the visitation desk, you'll have the car pull up, and you're going, oh God, no, not them again. You go deal with them. I'm going to the bathroom. We got the families that fight everybody. We got the people that are difficult to deal with. Even in only a few minutes, we get information. I remember when I did death notifications, we would have to decide what's going to happen here. I got punched in the head, but I was telling them bad news. It made sense. I didn't blame them. But I try to figure out how do we say it differently next time, or how do we conduct? And if I'm concerned, I have fear, what do I do with it? And you've had all kinds of training on when you go into somebody's home. How do you speak? When they come out here to your facility, I presume no one comes here happy and comfortable. They come here because of very difficult issues. But for the most part, it's tough. So how do we identify? How do we see problems before they break out? And what we do know is always, before there's an assault or even worse, there are a bunch of behaviors that precede it. So what we have to do is get more comfortable in paying attention and sharing it. And historically what we've done is we wait until the high risk, the assault or the threat. And our strategy here is saying, you know what, let's start dealing and reporting stuff when it's just troubled or troubling, difficult, or as a city attorney friend of mine once said, seriously annoying. I like it when a manager will go to HR who calls me and says, well, Pat, we got this situation. We're not really sure we need to call you or not because I don't know how bad it is. I don't know where we're going to go, but I like it already. The ones I don't like are like I got a call just Friday. I got a call from a company in Arizona that a woman had allegedly made threats to kill her supervisor and a number of other people. The PD was called in. They searched her desk, and they found a 9mm gun and an extra clip full of ammo in her desk. But because the threats were anonymous, they couldn't prove it, and so the police gave her a gun back. And the company fired her for bringing a gun to premises, and they called me 6 hours later saying, "Do we have a problem?" Yeah. How big? I don't know. But when somebody brings a gun into work and is saying, "I want to shoot my supervisor," it's a clue. And so I would prefer, you would prefer, frankly, to deal with things here. We'll deal with them here if we need to, but I'd rather deal with them here. And they typically give us, many cases, years of warning. There was an event I worked in Los Angeles, a shooting, where a fellow was told on a Wednesday morning in 1995, it's been a while, that he was going to be getting disciplined, he should contact representation. Instead, he went to his toolbox and got a gun. Now, we found out later that he kept the gun in his toolbox at least 2 weeks. And how did we find out that he had the gun in the toolbox for 2 weeks? People told us. He showed it to them. Did they report it? No. So he walked through the facility and shot and killed every supervisor he could find. There's no good news, but there's less bad. Over 20 supervisors worked there. Most of them had left to go to another facility across town, literally 40 minutes earlier. Otherwise, he might have shot 20. But he killed 4 men. Now, one of the interesting elements is that when he went to trial, we were able to read his diary. Everything becomes public. And when he was only 12 years old, he kept a diary. By the way, anybody here keep a diary, a journal? Anybody here? Every mass murderer keeps a diary. I'm just saying. Okay, mass murders and geniuses then. Because not just mass murders, but they all do. Willie Woods kept a diary, and when he was 12 years old, in his diary, he wrote, "Big people hurt me. Someday I'm going to kill big people." Now, when you're 12 years old, who's big people? Parents, in his case, Dad. His father was so violent that his mom left the home when he was a young boy. When a mama leaves behind a kid, that's interesting. And then all the father's abuse that used to go at mom now went to the boy, and he was brutalized. And he grew up hating his dad. Now, when he was 41, when he committed the murders, his dad's long since gone. So who's big people now? Bosses. And maybe more importantly, and more broad, authority. You aren't the boss of me. Don't tell me what to do. I'm the customer. By the way, is the customer always right? No! But they're still the customer. So now we get to talk about both sides of the matter. It's tough. And we have people who push back, and they don't feel they're getting what they deserve in a manner they desire or demand. And all of a sudden, you've all had the experience where someone is mad at you, and you're thinking to yourself, what in the heck did happen to him on the way in here? Because this isn't worth all that. And one of the problems is you don't know what happened to folks when they were kids, but they will act out and give us clues. If we can identify behavior of concern, whatever that means, get it to the right folks, we can intervene. And some folks, they got a problem, we can help them fix. Some folks need to go find employment elsewhere. All right, but what do we have right here? Because I don't want to come in here if we can help it. So when I get brought in, I understand there's this quote-unquote pathway to violence. There's really that progression of behavior. And when I start to assess and look, I really try to address this key concept. And if you get this concept, you're further along than most people, because it on the surface is pretty easy, but in practice it's pretty tough. We use the word threat in many ways, sometimes interchangeably, but they're very different. And we try to manage threat. We assess risk. We use the word threat as in somebody made a threat. I have a case where this fellow in Northern California, he went to his boss, he asked for a 6-month leave of absence. Boss says, we don't have a leave of absence, I need you to work. You don't want to work, you can quit, but I'm not holding your spot. So he calls in sick the next day, and eventually they get a letter from his psychologist saying he cannot come to work because he's stressed out and all that stuff. And they did the workers' comp evaluation. They denied the claim, as they should have. And he still doesn't come back to work, so they wrote him a letter. And they said in the letter, you must report for work by Thursday, June 30th, Failure to do so will result in loss of employment. On Tuesday, 28th of June, on his Facebook it says, Thursday I'm going back to work, Friday I'll probably be going to jail. Is that a threat? You think LA County Sheriffs are going to come in and arrest, prosecute for 422 PC criminal threat? No way. Because in the state of California, to be a criminal threat, it has to be imminent, unequivocal, specific. Well, it's none of those. So is it a threat? Probably not. Is it something that reasonable people, you and me, is it something that reasonable people would perceive as threatening? Now I got a yes. I perceive that as threatening. And when one of the coworkers took a picture of that page and posted it at work, it scared a lot of folks, as it should have. Threat as in made a threat. Threat as in acting in a threatening way. Threat as in poses a threat. And they're very different. And a lot of times we get hung up on this. Did he make a threat or not? If they didn't make a threat, there's nothing we can do. No. I want to know if they're doing this so that we can assess. Do they pose a threat? So I flew up to Northern California, and I did my homework before I went up. I found out he's auditioning for Ultimate Fighter, you know, the show in Vegas, and you got to give him a 6-month commitment, and he's a heck of a fighter. He's an MMA fighter, and not good enough to do the show, but he had 2 fights while he was off on workers' comp, and he won it. He was good. He got a kind of low-grade contract. He had gym sponsorship. When his wife saw the Facebook, she said, take that down. He was afraid of her. And then I flew up, and I'm interviewing him, and never ignore or miss the little things. I'm talking to the fella, and he says, Mr. Prince, they flew you up here to ask me to decide whether I'm going to what? Hurt my supervisor? If I wanted to beat him up, I'd have done it already. He only lives 2 blocks from me. He's got a point. So what's his risk level? It's low. What's the fear level? High. And now we've got a challenge. But we need to make sure we address it for what it is. And this is a challenge because a lot of employees will say I was threatened. And whether you were or not, I don't know. We'll look. And if I truly feel threatened, and I report it to my manager, who reports it to the risk manager, and they brings the threat team together, and they decide he's low risk, well, forget them. They must be dumb or something. The guy threatened me. But we need to make sure we know what we really have so we do the right thing. Because if we overreact, we can make it much worse. If we underreact, we can make it worse. Let's do the right thing. And that's the challenge. Because emotionally, if I'm the employee who feels threatened, forget the right thing. I want them gone. And it reminds me of that back to zero tolerance. Is firing everybody a good option? Now let's figure out what we have first. It reminds me of restraining orders. Do restraining orders protect women from domestic violence? We know that 37% of women who are murdered by a domestic partner are killed within 72 hours of getting a restraining order against that partner. And some people will argue compellingly that the restraining order got him killed. Now, some people will argue, in my opinion, equally compellingly, that for 63% it might have saved their life. So, do we get restraining orders or not? And the right answer, of course, is it depends. If it serves us and helps protect, we'll do it. If it makes it worse, let's think twice. What are we going to do with the person? It depends on what we have. Not this crazy one-size-fits-all. And this is the hardest thing, because when we feel fearful, it changes things. And I get it. So now we have to address that, because I respect your fear and I respect your discomfort, but we need to make sure we act on what we really have, and that's key. So I'll get called in. I'll be asked to look at a situation and do a risk assessment. And when I get involved in a risk assessment, I will address 3 elements. First, we have to clearly understand that individual, that person who's creating fear, that quote-unquote person of concern, a person of interest. What's that mean? Suspect. See, I want to get rid of that suspect thing and say a person of interest. I don't even think a crime has been committed. I don't think anybody's been harmed. But you know what? Something's going on, and I want to look into it further. I want to see if we can steal that term. And we will look at that person of interest, and we'll try to understand what we can. What's going on at home? What's going on financially? What's going on with other extended family? What's going on at work? How do they perceive the world and options and resources? How do they look at you? How do they perceive you? So back to Mr. Woods in 1995. After he shot 4 men, he put the gun in his pocket of his coveralls and was walking out. And we interviewed him later in jail, and we said, Mr. Woods, where were you going? And he said, I was going to kill myself, but I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of dying on their property. As he's walking out, in from the loading dock comes another supervisor who'd been on a cigarette break. And Willie takes the gun out of his pocket, he puts it in the man's forehead, and he said, I just killed 4 of the supervisors, I should kill you too. But he also went on to say, but you know, you always treated me okay. You were all right to me. And he put the gun back in his pocket and walked on by. I'm not the brightest bulb in the chandelier. I'm not the smartest person in this room. But I get it. Where do you and I have more influence? On somebody's psychological development or on the work environment? The work environment. Some folks in the room are thinking, I don't have a lot of influence there. And I get it. But we have more here. If you can only do one thing every day, what can you do to make this the safest place possible? Treat people with respect and dignity. And I like that because I've been saying that for years, and it's right over there on your vision statement. We treat people with respect. You do it because it's good business. You do it because it's humane. You do it because it's safe. I don't care why you do it, but for goodness sake, please do. And I hear people say stuff that's really dumb. Well, you know what? I'll treat people well with respect until they prove otherwise. Or I treat you the way you treat me. I was good with the guy, and then when he showed me disrespect, he got what he deserved. No, no, no. We treat people with respect. That's who we are. That's how we do business. And you know what? I don't know the training you get over there, but I bet you that's the foundation of training when you go and deal with families. You're calm, you're quieter, you're slower, you're respectful. You give people dignity at times when they may not feel very dignified. You give them strength. Whether it's an employee or a family, outsider, we have a lot more influence and power. And I typically don't talk much about this one, the trigger, because if the first 2 boxes are full up enough, well, we all know the expression. If it's not one thing, there's another. Because you know what? If these are full up enough, any old thing will do. So we focus here. What's going on? What options do we have? How do we address this? How do we address this? And what comes together that allows us to go home and to shift? And when we come up with the risk assessment, as I mentioned earlier, we decide low, moderate, or high risk. Low risk doesn't mean nothing's going on. It doesn't mean no harm, no foul. It means they're not going to come in and hurt you. Not today, not tomorrow, maybe not ever, but at least not today or tomorrow. I was interviewed once, big national channel after a shooting I worked, and they said, Mr. Prince, you've done all these threat assessments. How many were high risk? I said, 2 answers. How many did the employer think were high risk? Well, all of them. They wouldn't have called me. How many turned out to be high risk? Thank God, very few. Very few. Statistically, I don't know what the number is, but it's small. If we are maybe to make that triangle more accurate, we do something like this. But here's the significance. We need to address this because it's easier. And we know very few of these folks go up here. But every one of these started down here. And if we address this behavior and we look at things like cursing, getting in people's faces, belligerent, hostile language, even things like cursing, I have a hard time with that because I don't want to be a hypocrite. I cuss a lot, you know, and then my kids used to charge me $1. We called it the Disneyland Fund. And after a while it became the Euro Disney Fund. And but I realized profanity has a negative impact and has no business at home or at work. And we look at how we talk, how we treat. And what we do is we lower this threshold, because the lower this is, the less likely it is for this to happen. And from my business perspective, the easier it is to see this. It's kind of easy, but I may curse and yell because that's how I was raised or whatever. And then we got another employee here who's curse and yell because they want to be like me and fit in. And then we got another employee over here who's curse and yell because, well, they're falling apart. They're losing everything, and they're not just desperate, they're flat out dangerous, and we can't tell the difference. It creates so much background noise. I say, let's go back and look at how do we do business? And even the little things really do count. What's our environment? What's our climate? How do we, you have training when you go into somebody's home, how do you speak to them? When you're up on the hill dealing with families, how do you interact? How do you conduct yourself? All these things we do because it's good business. We do because it's humane and dignified. We do it because it also makes us safer, and there's something to be said for that. So the hard part is when somebody like me comes and says it's low risk, but you're afraid, like that guy I mentioned up in Northern California. To say it's low risk is not to demean the fact that you're afraid, does not diminish the fact that they did something wrong. We can take administrative action. We can address the behavior, but we want to make sure we put it in the context that it deserves, so our response is appropriate for that situation. And the key ultimately is the sharing of information. There was a study done by the United States Secret Service in conjunction with the Department of Education that showed what we'd been seeing for years, but it's nice to have the data support us. They looked at school shootings for 100 years, from 1900 to 2000, and there were a bunch of them. And they were able to find evidence in over 98% of the cases that the person who engaged in the act actually told people he was going to do it, communicated a threat. And I guess maybe not surprising, only 16 or so percent, 18% actually told the target. Very rarely do folks say, I'm going to hurt you. No, that's not what happens. What happens in the real world? Better watch out, because I'm going to get him. Who are they telling? In schools, who are they telling? Other students. And in the workplace, I heard it. Who are they telling? Coworkers. We all hear stuff. I get that most folks who say even dumb things aren't going to hurt somebody. But everybody who did said those things. We need to share it and create a culture where, you know what, we don't talk like that anymore. I worked a case as a very blue-collar environment, and there's this group of guys one day after shift, they're all sitting around talking. There's one guy's complaining about his wife and all this stuff, and finally he says, well, maybe I should just go home and shoot her and be done with it. And what the coworkers did, they laughed. So, yeah, that's funny. One of the guys said, well, you know, when you're done shooting mine, I need the insurance. That was on a Friday. Monday, he did shoot her, and she lived. And I got the call to be there in the emergency room in the ER when she came out of recovery from the surgery for the shot, because she got shot by a rifle. I had to tell her that after he shot her, he shot and killed her 4-year-old son. And then he shot and killed her. And I was in the house, and I saw what that rifle did to the baby. And it's been years. I'm still angry at the coworkers for just laughing and not reporting it. I'm angry at management for not creating an environment where people are willing to share it. It was wrong. Now, good news is most guys who complain about their wives are not going to hurt them. But I don't want you to, we call those existential moments. It's a life-changing moment. Any of y'all know who Andy Williams is? Who's Andy Williams? There was the Andy Williams, a singer, wonderful. Moon River, I think, was his. He did some stuff. Married to a beautiful woman named Claudine Longier, and then she was having an affair with the guy, remember Spider Savage? They had a fight, and she shot him in the face. All right, that's not the Andy Williams I'm thinking of. But there was another Andy Williams, a little boy at Santana High School in Santee, California, San Diego County. And this Andy Williams was a slender kid. He was bullied, he was picked on, he was abused at school. One day he's at a friend's house, and he's talking about how he'd like to get a gun and go in and kill the bullies. The father of his friend heard him. And what did Dad say to Andy Williams? You don't have the guts to do it. Belittled him, taunted him. And 2 days later, Andy Williams shot 11 students at Santana High School in Santee, California. As co-workers, as parents, as managers, we all have an opportunity to change the future. And I'm not a big fan of ratting people out. I don't even know what that means. But I'm a really big fan of sharing information that's meaningful. And when people engage in this behavior, they're telling us something. Because it's not how we do business here. And when somebody is, it means something. Even when it's a member of the public we don't know all that well, we notice behavior and we pay attention. And we start to use the tools that have been given us to address it. So what do? We need to first share information. We need to make sure it gets to someone who is able to calmly address it, catch their breath, and then we want to create an intervention for that particular situation. If we underreact, it has the potential to get much worse. If we over-respond, knee-jerk, I'm not a big fan of calling in the cavalry. I don't necessarily need a restraining order, but I don't mind it if it helps us. If we over-respond, it can get worse. So what we want to do is catch our breath, slow the process down, and then address the behavior that is causing concern. And it's frustrating sometimes because what I want when I'm scared is I want the person gone. If I'm sitting at the desk over here at the visitation center and somebody's causing all kinds of grief and the supervisor comes up and gives them what they want, I'm going, you didn't back me up. I think, yeah, you did. She made it safer, or he made it safer. And sometimes I want them gone. I want them punished. No, we don't. What we really want is to go home every day in the shift. And it's a real teeny mind shift, but it's a good one. We attain success by how professional we are throughout the course of our conduct. We solve problems. I don't need to be bigger and badder than anybody else out there. That's that childhood, playground stuff. Here, are we successful in how we do our business? And when we assess risk, we match it, we resolve the issue, we're better served. We have a few things then to really look forward to. And when I try to think of the 5 pretty straightforward objectives of this whole program, number 1, we need to have kind of a common language. Low, moderate, or high. That makes sense to me. We can get our arms around it. I once gave a talk a few years ago, and there's a psychologist in the room. He said, no, that's inadequate. You need more levels. I'll go, okay, like what? He goes, you need a low, moderate, and a moderate high. I said, okay, fine. I'm not going to argue with you. Low, moderate, or high. It does 2 things. 1, it helps us understand what we have, and it helps us then create a plan to deal with it. So we understand all the different elements of violence prevention, and we're going to look at other things like access controls, badges, but ultimately, I'll tell you, they make a big difference. And so what do? We slow down, we do whatever it takes to get the access, we wear our badges. Okay, it's okay, because ultimately, it has a piece in the overall pie, and it really is a meaningful one. So we understand the whole approach. We support and really create a culture of mutual respect. We treat people courteously. It's how we do business. It's who we are as a company. But bottom line is, it's what we do because we're going to go home tonight. And I don't know how many people when they're 8, 9, 10 years old. And some folks are angry coming in the door. And they're mad at things you and I have no control over. Let's make it harder to blame us and easier to see so management and other folks can deal with it. We need to make sure we fix problems early. When we go back and look, even early on, it's little things. It's unmanaged stress that builds to the unmanageable point. It's anger that continues to build to rage. It's a lot of things that are unaddressed early. So we need to go and look at what kind of resources, whether it's an employee assistance program, whether it's conflict resolution opportunities, deal with things early. We often get to think, well, it's fine, I'll just ignore them. No, let's fix it. Let's address things. And when we go back and look at violence, it all came from something that wasn't managed effectively early. And early on, it might have been fixed. Late, there's no resolution. I think this is a little, some of you might have seen already. We want a single point of contact, and I put 2. But I believe in my heart of hearts, if you call security or if you call anyone in HR, because what we find is your little piece is important. Yours is there, and yours is there. And it by themselves is not all that much. Put together, a really remarkable picture may emerge. And if we make sure that any concerns are sent to HR, they're gathered, they're monitored, they keep files, they pay attention over the long run, the pictures may emerge. And sometimes I'll come in and I'll say, well, this guy's been difficult for years. Then why call me now? Best predictor of the future is the past. Well, he's different now. It feels different. I look for change in intensity, frequency, some of those kinds of things. It means something. What is it? And it helps to have that map. And then we all look in the mirror and we ask ourselves, what's our piece? What can I do? And I realize some folks in the room have more authority than others. And I get that. And I do believe the higher up in the organization you are, the more responsibility you do have. But everybody at every level of the organization has a piece of this pie. And we all have a meaningful opportunity to look at the culture, to share important information, to address problems early. And I truly know, not just believe, but I know where we do these things, we dramatically decrease the potential for violence, and we dramatically increase the opportunity to go home every day and to shift. And that's a big deal to know. But we really wanted today just kind of lay out the map and really share the approach and the concepts that are driving us, so that when something happens, it makes sense. But I got to tell you, if you have a question, I'm not shy. I'm a chain of command person. I like it. I'd prefer you go through your chain of command and get to HR. If you feel like calling HR directly, I'm good with that. What I'm not good with is questions not getting answered. When we have these things, I know something, but I didn't do anything with it. That part is just crazy making. We need to address stuff.